Well, a good example is recently with the California drought, EBMUD here in the Bay Area raised all the prices and placed a lot of fines because of usage, water usage, and they wanted to really discourage people from using too much water because we are in a drought. However, as soon as the drought ended, EBMUD never retracted on those higher fees. They just left them
Yeah,
be.
absolutely. And we see this all the time. So with the different costs going up, landlords have to be in a position, whether they have existing stock, existing apartment stock, to be able to raise the rents. And at the same time, these rents don't just go up because landlords are, greedy and get to raise it to whatever they want. There's a demand. There's the whole what a buyer will pay or what a tenant will pay. So if the demand is there and people are able to pay the cost, then this is also a direct action of rents going up, which by the way is a direct action of employers paying their employees more. And that's because the economy is doing well. You compare that to other places like Tennessee, where the economy there is much slower, people's incomes is much lower, but the quality of life isn't there either, right? So again, speaking to a lot of the points and reasons for rent control that Prop 10 speaks to, it fails to take into consideration the big picture, right? So we would literally have to change a number of factors here in California for it to work. Like stop raising property taxes, stop giving people raises, stop raising the cost of gas. Then we can easily begin to control and curb and just keep rents exactly the same, but everything else also would take its toll on that.
Now, for developers in rent control areas, one of the reasons why they're encouraged is because they can also charge higher rents, which allows them to eventually sell a property for more money, which makes financing a lot easier to obtain. And they're able to actually make these developments happen. If prices for new construction get limited and restricted, would that essentially wipe out a developer's motive to develop in these cities?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I was speaking to earlier is that um, usually in areas with high rent control, because the housing stock is so low, people will pay more for rent because there's very little motivation for tenants to move because they're able to, keep this very, very low rent. So the housing stock is decreased. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, it just so happens that the majority of those cities that have rent control are the very tier one cities that have the best high paying jobs. So that's why people coming in with a higher paying job are willing to pay more for rent. So a developer can run that simple calculation and go, if I can rent this existing stock for this at market rent versus me building it and getting a little bit more, can I get a specific return on my money? Right? And if I add in all the costs of buying the land, paying the architect, paying the city's different fees for the traffic impact, the school impacts, again, all of these various things that this particular study doesn't really address is that all of the cost to build brand new apartment stock also contributes to the infrastructure of the city, not only from better streets to better schools, but it also increases the amount of units that can be rented. In fact, the main primary reason why in those cities the rents become higher and higher and make it easier for people to want to build there is because of the rent control. It's more difficult to build in those cities because of all the different hoops we have to go through, so that the existing brand new apartment stock that's actually built there still isn't enough. So, for example, if you were to take all of the existing permits that have been pulled in San Francisco and or the existing projects that are actually being built right now, and you were to build them all out and then have them all fully occupied, there would still be like 3 or 4,000 units short of the actual housing demand because they make it very difficult to build that. So if all of a sudden there's no more financial incentive, then of course that's going to slow down dramatically. In fact, probably the existing permits that have been or entitlements that have been allowed would probably stop building altogether, and then the ones that may have gone to that point of no return of just having to build the unit, of course they're going to probably have to build the unit and then potentially have to decide on how they're going to weather the various losses that they're going to incur, because now suddenly somebody else who doesn't really have a context for how much they spent and what they're into it for and the whole reason and motivation to build it is now going to have the right to dictate to them what they can rent those units for.
And one of the problems in many of these cities is not just the city government alone. It's also the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard, the people that get together and will ban against a project, even though the project is approved by the city or falls within the city's guidelines. They will band together to prevent a project. Or CEQA is another big issue that developers have to face, where someone can anonymously sue a project and tie up a project in legal action in litigation for 2 years.
No, no, absolutely. In fact, I mean that's a whole nother video
Discussion,
blog and
yeah.
discussion all on its own. Right now, we're just kind of addressing why is Prop 10 actually good for California? Is it actually going to does better or stronger rent control laws actually help a renter? Not to, what you just brought up is brings into a consideration a whole bunch of other reasons that are barriers to entry for a developer, right? So like I had mentioned earlier, like the various traffic demand management or TDMs that we have to go through, or inclusionary or below market rate hoops we have to handle. Not to mention they're going to be increasing the various types of construction demands, so that new construction must have solar or other more energy efficient means, all of which cost money. So you're building, you're not only building but being required to build a costlier, however, more environmentally friendly and environmentally sound building, which of course costs money. And you have to go through all of these other hoops, as you mentioned, CEQA, NIMBYs, people protesting against a development. So as a developer, what we're faced many times with is, one, we're building because we have a financial motivation to. But we're also building because there's a demand. And that demand are the various tenants saying there's not enough housing, right?
Well, why create plastic cups? It's because there's a demand for
Because there's a
plastic
demand for
cups.
plastic cups. And so you go and you try to answer this demand, but as you pointed out, sometimes the neighborhood will stand up against it and say that, oh, it's a greedy developer. Why is he building more apartment units? Well, he's building more apartment units because there's a demand, which is the very reason why your rents are going up, but you're not affected because you might have rent control. So it's a no-win situation. Now, because of the existing rent control laws, namely Costa-Hawkins, which gives that financial motivation to be able to build new because it's not restricted by rent control, which Prop 10 would now seek to do. It would now seek to be able to put rent control restrictions on new stock
And single family
and
homes.
single-family homes.
In fact, I just got a newsletter from the city of Berkeley that they have Measure Q on the ballot. Measure Q would, if Measure Q passes, it only goes into effect if Prop 10 passes.
Yes.
And Measure Q expands rent control back to single family homes, condos, and it makes a modification to one of their old amendments or measurements from years ago, because the city of Berkeley tried already in the past to expand rent control to single family homes. Costa-Hawkins came in, eliminated that entirely. And so Measure Q would be a modification to that original measurement in case Prop 10 passes.
Well, you touched on a very important factor here. So a lot of people who are looking at this current bill, that what they are saying is it doesn't pass statewide rent control, and that's true. It doesn't. What it does is it empowers the various cities, as you pointed out, to be able to increase or make stronger the current rent control laws if they're already there, or make it easier to create rent control in that city if it doesn't already exist. And so Measure Q, as you pointed out, which is going to pass if it's contingent upon Proposition 10 passing, does exactly that. It takes rent control laws that are already harsh in Berkeley from a landlord's perspective or a developer's perspective, yet despite this, there's still a financial incentive to build new in Berkeley, and it makes it even stronger. So it would almost be that straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak. It would, unless there's some additional types of incentives or angles, amidst all of the various hoops that somebody already has to go through. You have the financial incentives that you have to overcome, the inclusionary or below market rate issues that you have to overcome. You have to overcome the possibility of your neighbors coming at you and stopping a project after you're into it, several thousand or several hundred thousands of dollars already. Then now Measure Q would only make that power even stronger. In fact, speaking specifically to Berkeley, I recall very clearly when I had a project there on university and the various hoops that I had to go through with my neighbors, all of which had the right to make various changes to a project that I was paying for, such as, but not limited to, the color that it would be. And he had like you to move this particular parapet from here to here, all of which costs additional money when you have to go through with your architect, right? So again, I'm just giving you an idea of the various hoops that you have to go through just to get a project approved for what it's going to look like. And so when you make those when you take away almost all of the incentives, it just makes it completely not worthwhile to really build. All right, unless some other issues or unless some other incentives may come along, of which I don't really see any.